Hello, finally decided to put my story together of when I started with SCK. This was in 1974. This morning we heard the passing of Olivia Newton-John, so I thought I'd finish this story off because it's been sitting there for quite some time. I started at the Mitcham Pigeon Club with a friend of mine called SCK, and we went crazy on exercise. It was very hard back in those days. I'd come home with my knuckles bleeding and my back bleeding through doing the sit-ups on the hard floor. We did things like factory jumping. We used to, before even parkour was even invented, a friend of mine had a factory in Sydney Road in Brunswick, and we used to run from one factory to another, jumping over the little alleyways a whole lot. It's a bit crazy, but it was a lot of fun when I look back on it. I trained 4 to 5 times a week for, 79 is when I got my black belt. I used to run and play squash as well. And I met some amazing people there. I met Mark Corrie, I met Phil Davies, who we're still friends with. He lives up in Dargo now. And we did a lot of security together, a lot of exciting times. We did security for Ice House, the Boomtown Rats, and of course Olivia Newton-John. We spent a week with Olivia. We went to the opening of Xanadu up in Sydney, and that was amazing. There was a big reception there, and every who's who was there. And after the reception there, Olivia showed her real colours. She was so tired on that night. We got to bed about 2:30, I think. Not Olivia and I, but we got to bed. And we walked out to the car waiting for her, and there was a little girl waiting. And this was really early, 2:30 in the morning, and Olivia signed the autograph for the little girl, and then she got in the car and she was really tired and was going to drive off. Stopped the car and said, "Little girl, come into the car," and she gave her makeup and made a big fuss of her. Even though she was super tired, I thought that was an amazing thing. It showed her real colours. We did tournaments and camps. We had a big camp at Marysville. Some of the photos that you'll see pretty soon, these are all the people I met, and a lot of them I keep in touch with. The camp at Marysville was the one just before I got my black belt, and that amazing old place was burnt down, unfortunately, with the big fires that went through there. I met Irina, Olivia's mum. She had security problems and we were helping her out. She had kids jumping over the fence. She lived in South Yarra, and all the kids around the area knew she was Olivia's mum, and they used to jump over the fence and annoy the hell out of her. So it was up to us to sort of make her place a lot safer, which we did, and Olivia really appreciated that. In 1986 I started Aikido, so this all happened before in 1986. My sensei Mel Lomax, 1985 he went to Queensland, and the club slowly started to close down here, so I decided to just start training on my own with my friend Des White in his garage, and we did that. We trained pretty hard, and all of a sudden we found all these guys were starting to train with us, and that was the start of Aikido, and that's the next story you'll see.
Training at SCK was always fantastic, but when we started doing security, it was a totally different ball game. After a couple of small gigs, we ended up getting Ice House down in the Palace in Kilda. That was a really, really good concert to see. There was so many teeny boppers back in those days. After that, Bob Geldof came out with the Boomtown Rats. We did their concerts, and he came out to our dojo in Ringwood and watched one of our second degree gradings. I presented Bob with a set of nunchucks, which I believe he didn't quite get back into England, so he would remember me. The premiere of Xanadu was very exciting. It was held in Sydney. There was about 5 of us who went up. We all stayed in at the Hilton up in Sydney. Mel and I had the room right opposite Olivia's penthouse, so we could keep an eye on the hallway at all times, left the door open all the time. A guy from the hotel security came in, and he said that there was a stalker in the area, and did we have any weapons? And Mel said, no, we haven't got any weapons. And he said, well, what if someone, and he went to reach for his pocket as if he was grabbing for a weapon, and Mel threw a shuriken at him, and it landed in this mahogany door very close to the guy's face. And the guy got a bit of a shock and said a few more words and left. Mel and I were just relaxing in the room when we saw someone walk past our door. Mel ran straight out and asked the guy to stop. And what was he doing there? He was a young guy. He didn't talk, and Mel just asked him to leave, that he wasn't allowed up in this area. After the premiere of Xanadu, we went to a huge reception that was set aside for Olivia in the heart of Sydney. Every who's who and celebrity you could ever imagine were there. It was such an amazing night. Mel and I finally got to bed about 3 o'clock the next morning, and we were hoping for a sleep in, but I heard this knocking. I jumped out of bed, and here's this guy knocking on Olivia's door. He was dressed in a waiter's uniform, which I thought was a bit strange, and he had a breakfast tray with lots of dishes on them. I went over and asked him who he was and what he was doing there, and he didn't answer. I lifted up one of the stainless steel bowls that covered the breakfast, and it was already used. He obviously picked it up from someone's room, and he was trying to get into Olivia's room. Mel came to the door in his night attire to see what was going on, and he recognised the young guy from the night before and just pointed the door and just told him to get out. Later that morning I decided to go for a walk, and as I left the hotel I happened to glance over to my right and I saw the young guy standing near a pillar. I kept walking and made out I didn't see him, got a little way up the road, and then I ran back straight up to our room, and here he was. He'd just gotten out of the lift, and he'd obviously spotted Mel, so he didn't go any further along the hallway. He was then asked ever so politely to leave. As we left for Melbourne the next morning, I spotted him in the foyer watching us. Gave me the creeps. When we arrived in Melbourne, Mel and I had the room opposite Olivia's penthouse. As we were unpacking, our young waiter friend from Sydney casually strolled past our room. How in the hell did he know where she was staying? This time I ushered him to the lift and told him that he was worrying me, and if I see him again near Olivia, it would be a very bad outcome for him. He never spoke to me once. He just stared at me with those glazed eyes. I showed a photo of him to Olivia's mother, and she identified him as Ralph Nayu. Just a quick note here. I did find out a lot later that he had changed his name in America to Newton John. So this explains how he got access to hotels, etc. so easily. After the premiere of Xanadu, there was a huge party up in the centre of Melbourne in a place called the Underground. Nothing much happened except a guy made rude remarks to Olivia. Mel grabbed him by the throat and lifted him straight up in the air and threw him out into King Street. I was laughing because he was dragging him across the crowd and he couldn't do anything about it. When we walked back in, 2 cooks came out from the kitchen. One had knives. Couldn't believe it. But everything else went over pretty well that night. The following night there was a huge reception in the Melbourne Town Hall. We were up in the balcony with Olivia, and Swanston Street was absolutely packed. Couldn't believe the amount of people there. It reminded me of the Beatles days. After she was given the keys to the city and it was all over, we had to get her back to the car. It was a nightmare. We got downstairs, and even though there was police there, they couldn't control the crowds coming in and around the car. Mel and I managed to open the door, and she was obviously very scared with what was happening, and I pushed my bum against the door just to hold it open with my head against the car, and this guy climbed up on top of my head and was trying to get an autograph of Olivia. I wasn't very happy, but after that was over, that was the end of it all.